Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our second webinar on the future of roads. We did ask people to submit their questions to us in advance, and we got quite a lot. So what we've done is we've narrowed them down to ensure that we cover the things that people want us to cover in the Q&A. But please feel free to use the chat function, just to make your own comments and to ask further questions, or to use the hashtag TFN Talks on social media. I think we're all very aware of the impact COVID-19 has had on the way we live our lives. But once the country moves out of the health crisis, we need to look at how we can get our economy moving again. Transport for the North has this week sent a letter to the Secretary of State calling for a commitment to a Northern Economic Recovery Plan and also a Northern Infrastructure Pipeline, comprising a mix of both road and rail schemes for both rural and urban communities. Our board have been clear, however, that we want to see significant change in the North with regards to climate change. We want to see people use their cars less and use more sustainable ways of travelling. However, rail schemes can take years, if not decades, to come to fruition. And with that in mind, many people in the North have little option but to use their car, even if it is to get to a rail station. We also want to understand how people will work together in the future. Will the traditional 9-to-5 job become more obsolete in the North, as it has already done in a certain extent in London? So the main question for today is, what is the future of roads? Will it still be the way the majority of us travel? Is it possible to use roads in a more sustainable way, both within the context of future technologies and future work patterns post-pandemic? We've had apologies from Mayor Ben Houchin, but I'm delighted to say that Paul Booth, who represents the Tees Valley on our board, will be joining us a little later to talk to us about what they're doing locally with regards to decarbonisation and the use of hydrogen in particular. So in terms of our first contributor, I'm delighted to introduce Councillor Keith Little, who was first elected to Cumbria County Council in 2004 and has served as the Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport since 2013. I'm interested about his views on roads in a rural setting, which for some is the only option. We also recently had the announcement of the preferred route for the A66 improvements, which will go a long way to improving east-west connections to the northeast. Welcome, Councillor Little.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with us with you this afternoon. Cumbria is a unique county up on the northwest, borders onto Scotland. We have the Solway Firth along our western approach and off through the Lake District, very popular now with visitors, and adjoining Yorkshire, Northumbria, and of course southwest Scotland and down into Lancashire. We have the main M6 motorway running through us, and we have many major roads, but the vast majority of our 4,900 miles of highway, we are the fourth largest highways authority in England, and we are primarily rural with only one city and half a dozen major towns. So the road network is vital to our public being able to move about, our transport coming into the county off the M6 to be able to deliver the goods to the shops and centres that people need. And along with the railway, it moves the vast majority of our people for industry and to earn a living. We work very closely with the Department of Transport. We've had a number of disasters with the storm beast from the east, and also with the flooding situations we had in 2015. So we have a very good working relationship with the Department of Transport, and I'm pleased to say also with Highways England. As a member of the Transport for the North Board, I work alongside colleagues there where we can work with government to try and get our schemes brought forward, and working closely with our colleagues now with the local LEPs, playing a very important part now in supporting Cumbria through potential funding where it's needed. In particular, we recognise the response to the climate change in front of us, and as I say, we've worked closely with DFT over the last 5 years since Storm Desmond, We now include in this some new bridge inspections with a new vehicle that was sponsored by the department, a bridge cat that's just been over into out of the country on some demonstrations. And we've developed flood alert systems on all of our 1,600 bridges so that we can predict flooding and have them inspected during flood situations. Because excessive water onto our highway does an immense amount of damage. Austerity has been a big issue for us in Cumbria with the amount of roads we have. And austerity, I believe, will continue for some time. But we are speaking with the department. We had the Secretary of State on the phone just yesterday, looking to see where he can help. And I have to say, in all honesty, successive Secretaries of State have been to Cumbria on many occasions, very supportive of our ask. So that's Cumbria in a nutshell. Happy to broaden out on that, Peter, and look forward to questions coming forward.
Thank you, Keith. That was very illuminating. I'd like now to introduce Adam Simmons, who is the Director of Future Road Investment Strategies at Highways England. He's responsible for producing the evidence and plans to support Highways England's programme of works on our motorways and A roads. Adam is also leading Highways England's work on the preparation for the next investment period 2025 to 2030. Adam is now going to update us on what the future of roads looks like from a Highways England's perspective. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Peter, and quite envious of your background. Apologies for the bookshelves behind me. Obviously, the current normal at the moment. So very pleased to be here on the TFN webinar, and I'm very pleased to be representing Highways England this afternoon. Just wanted to say a few things about where we are with the plans over the next few years, and see a little bit about where we are with the response to COVID-19 and how we look forward sustainably. We're obviously very pleased to see government putting forward its road investment strategy, so plans for the motorways and major A roads for which Highways England is responsible over the next 5 years. And I think what that strategy reflected is the importance that government places around infrastructure, road infrastructure, and supporting the national economy. There's £27 billion of investment in over those 5 years, and I think this reflects that importance to the national economy. 2/3 of all freight and 1/3 of all traffic move through the strategic road network, and I think there will continue to be that sort of demand and traffic levels increasing to respond to that. We've been very pleased to be able to start that plan and continue with our plans during the COVID-19 crisis. I know obviously for some it's not been as straightforward to continue work through restrictions, but we're very proud that we've been able to continue to operate and maintain the network with our frontline staff, and work very closely with the supply chain to continue with projects, keep projects on track, still of course following government guidelines and restrictions, but continuing that work. And indeed in that we've recognised in these uncertain times the importance of keeping in the cash flow through the supply chain and being able to pay the supply chain on time. I think over 95% of invoices paid within 5 days during the COVID-19 crisis, so we're very proud we've been able to do that. And I think that does mean that whatever government does plan in the near future, obviously we don't know yet whether there'll be fiscal stimulus package or exactly how the Chancellor and the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister want to take things forward. But I think we're in a good place to build on the work we've done over the last few weeks and months, and obviously stand ready to take forward whatever work is required on top of the plans as exist at the moment. I think in there, of course, as the topic of today's webinar is how we do so in a sustainable way. And very pleased that already working towards zero carbon targets and other environmental targets is very much a focus of Highways England. And I think it'd just be worth setting out from our perspective how we're breaking down that, because as we all know, there's no one silver bullet that helps us tackle these sorts of important challenges for the transport sector, for the road sector. I think we recognise there are some things we can more directly influence. Our own carbon that we as a company directly generate through our offices, our own traffic officer fleet, for example. So doing a lot of work on that and encouraging to see those figures decline over year on year, thinking about things like electric vehicles for our fleet. And very much wanting to work more with the supply chain to embrace lower carbon technologies, lower carbon concrete, recycling asphalt, and so on. And I think there everyone wants to do the same thing. And one of the challenges is probably harnessing that ambition and all pulling together in the same direction. And I think there's some real opportunities there. But of course, as we all know, the biggest emitter in carbon are the vehicles on the network, the road user fleet. And I think that absolutely has to be taken forward in partnership with government, in partnership with other transport operators. We in Highways England absolutely are committed to playing our part in achieving the zero carbon targets that government has, and working with others on that. I think we recognise that there is a partnership approach that needs to be taken on that. And I think there are some good opportunities and where actually we can tackle more than one objective together. And for me, just to throw one idea into the debate this afternoon, I know that Highways England, we own quite a bit of land either side of our network, the so-called soft estate. We manage that to look at biodiversity, but I think there are opportunities to look to manage that to help with carbon sequestration, helping biodiversity, even tackling air quality and noise issues. And I think there's that deserves a lot of thought, and I know is something that we're thinking about. So I think, you know, we absolutely see demand for the road network will grow regardless of where we are with the fleet and electrification and so on. And I do see that investment helps ease congestion, give reliable journeys that are demanded by freight and other users of the network. And absolutely, we're up for that challenge to do so in a sustainable way. And look forward to joining the discussion later on this afternoon. Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much. That was really insightful on the thinking of Highways England. I'd like to now introduce Emma Antrobus, who has been the Northwest Director of the Institution of Civil Engineers since July 2018, overseeing the activity and budgeting for more than 6,500 members in the region. The Institution of Civil Engineers has more than 95,000 members across the world in all sectors of engineering, including transport, housing, development, energy and water. Emma is going to talk to us about the importance of infrastructure and roads, and in particular some of the economic implications, especially for construction, and how we can work towards a net zero target. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks very much, Peter. I think I'm delighted to have been invited today, so thank you very much for that. As Peter said, we have engineers all over the world, but about 6,500 members of the Institution of Civil Engineers here in the Northwest. And they do work in all sectors of infrastructure design and delivery. But although I'm not directly involved in transport delivery, my heart is very much in transport. I've supported a campaign for many transport schemes over the years, up to and including working for HS2 prior to this role. On reflecting about the talk today, I realised that this year is not really my first experience of a lockdown situation, albeit on a very, very different scale. Following the 1996 bomb that exploded in the heart of Manchester, the core of the city centre was locked down for everybody. And I worked with a lot of the businesses that were located there as access was completely denied, then gradually restored following the demolition and structural safety work, in order to try and salvage equipment and stock and even cash in tills for the shops. And then actually to build something altogether bigger and better. So although it's very different in scale and intensity for the whole country, there is something of that same attitude of we have to do what we have to do, and then how do we come back better? What I understood then and is true today is that our roads are vitally important for the economy, but many social reasons as well. And it shouldn't be a contest between road and rail. We need to have the best solution to fix the problems. We have congestion that's caused by too many vehicles using networks that were designed and built in a previous age, and then some short-sighted decisions taken. I'm thinking particularly kind of beaching cuts and things like that. From a northern perspective, we know that there's been historic underfunding of all our transport networks. This has been communicated well. But we're now in a position where we have a strategic body, we have Transport for the North, that can offer that coordinated and strategic direction. We need to have roads operating efficiently for all road users. And it's not about just the road itself, it's about the corridor, so that we can include cyclists and pedestrians, and including digital networks along those key corridors. Lockdown has shown us that taking non-essential travel off the roads makes enormous improvements to reliability for freight and for air quality. But this has come at an enormous social cost and damage to our economy over the last 3 months. Even so, when you look at having the major northern cities of Manchester and Sheffield only connected by the roads with the reliability of the Woodhead or Snake Passes, that seems inconceivable in this day and age. And it's clear that as the country gets back on its feet, congestion is already reoccurring. So this is a critical time to push forward with plans for an improved strategic road network that includes identifying those first and last mile pressure points. Unfortunately, the health concerns around using public transport in the short, medium term is likely to drive those congestion levels faster than is really anticipated, even with that greater use of flexible working and that promotion of active travel. I believe you can't actually buy a bike at the moment until about September. You know, those kind of immediate issues will go on for us. It's recognised that construction is always the first and usually the worst hit industry as we enter a recession in this country. But this may prove to be the exception to the rule for the short and medium term, as construction was able to continue, as Adam pointed out, on the highways network, but including building sites and things like that. And the government has a commitment to key infrastructure, and we hope that we might see more around that in the coming weeks and months. But the implications of this seismic shock to the economy by COVID-19 lockdown, and then followed swiftly on by whatever changes Brexit hits us with, those implications are just unclear at the moment, and for that medium to long term. However, the ICE, we continue to support our members to be qualified and suitably skilled, more importantly, as we move towards a more digital economy, to try and meet the challenges going forward. And we carry out extensive STEM engagement in schools and colleges to try and encourage the next generation to choose engineering, to cut the shortfall that we already have, but to solve the problems that we know are coming down the line. We're also, as an institution, working with the infrastructure client group on how we can improve working practice right across the industry so that we can deliver projects more collaboratively from design stage. So delays and cost overruns are minimised, and we can build that reliability into costing particularly. And we're producing recommendations for the government on how we might deliver on the zero carbon agenda whilst maintaining infrastructure development of whatever that might be. We're launching our State of the Nation on zero carbon on Wednesday, if people are interested in seeing what we have to say. And I think I'll leave that there just for now. I know there's a lot of questions already submitted, so we can move on. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma, and thanks for bringing Brexit into an already complicated debate. I'd now like to introduce Lucy Hudson, who leads freight and logistics for Transport for the North, taking a strategic view of road and rail networks used across the region. Freight is an area that is often missed when we talk about improvements, but in reality, it is crucially important to make sure the country is well stocked with what it needs. So I'm delighted that Lucy can join us to talk about what we're doing at Transport for the North with regards to freight and roads. Lucy.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I've been asked to talk about a little bit of an introduction about what we move in the North and how much. I'm going to talk a bit about COVID-19 and the response, and then a bit about decarbonisation. So in the North of England, about 90% of what we actually lift, the tonnes lifted, are by road. And 80% of that 90% is a sort of shorter journeys, which are called short haul journeys, which are difficult to convert to rail and to see the freight being moved. So it's to transfer all of our road activity onto rail is incredibly difficult, but I will come back to that. And so in terms of COVID-19, really pleased to see that our freight drivers are recognised as key workers. They delivered food, medicine, supplies, including new roll, to people. Without these roads, and without roads and the freight drivers on the roads, our supermarket shelves would have remained empty. And that would have been a very big challenge. As it was, there was empty shelves for a time, but the industry responded, and the supermarkets responding to that need quite quickly. They were able to do that because the supply chain was able to react and then move products from distribution centres that are across that store food and supplies. They're able to move that supply into the supermarkets, and what we were seeing was sort of Christmas levels of demand. So they knew they could do it. They just had to plan very quickly to respond to that. To then feed the products back into those distribution centres. Manufacturers slimmed down the product lines and production lines, and then they focused on distributing what people were buying. In terms of resourcing this, Tesco's went from 600,000 home deliveries to 1.3 million home deliveries within a blink of an eye. They brought 12,000 more people in to pick and pack, and that also then meant they had to employ 4,000 more drivers. Now that was a massive undertaking, but it meant that with more people on the roads, and the fact that people in their private cars weren't on the roads as much because we were all in lockdown, it meant the infrastructure was able to cope with that influx, and then people were able to move goods and materials more quickly. In terms of economic recovery, why would you invest in roads? When you think about, we need road upgrades, highways maintenance and renewals activity, technology updates, and things like electric vehicle charging points. It all makes journeys more effective. And throughout this crisis, we've realised how important roads are. If you make journeys more reliable, you can start reducing journey times. Having less congestion means you can make more deliveries and then keep people safe as well. In terms of freight, when I've spoken to people in the haulage industry, they could in the past get from Birmingham to Liverpool, then back, and then do another quick journey to Doncaster, all in one day, and that was typical. But as the roads became more congested, then those journeys became more complicated, and you could only do your Birmingham to Liverpool run. Now, you know, if we can reduce the road usage, but also improve the reliability and access to the roads, then those kind of responses for the freight industry can come back. In terms of decarbonisation, rail can and will work. When you think about if you transfer road freight to rail, you get 66% less carbon by rail, which is an incredible saving. It means that you need to have electrified lines and all the other things that we discussed, some of which we discussed last week. But new flows like T-Sport to I-Port Doncaster, 2 trains a day. So it means that one engine is doing 2 journeys there and back, means that rail can work over shorter distances, which then demonstrates the fact that running trains across the Pennines is also a real possibility for the industry to greet. So things like Trans-Pennine Route Upgrade and including freight in that are really key projects that that Transport for the North want to see. So I think roads are key. Right now, roads are really critical. They keep us moving, keep us supplied, and without our freight drivers who are key workers, we'd be a lot less in a lot less better position than we are now. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Lucy. That was really insightful. I think Paul, unfortunately, is a little bit delayed. So I'll just go into the Q&A to start with, and I'll put this first question to Keith. The most popular question was around how road building can align with climate change agenda. And is there anything more that can be done to push along new technologies and also alternative infrastructure investments such as broadband? So from your point of view, Keith, how are you tackling this conundrum?
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and a good question, obviously. If we look at the broadband, we've been working with the broadband and the government scheme over the last sort of 15 years, really. It came down pretty much to BT, one provider, but the rurality of Cumbria makes it difficult in very small areas now. And I think there's only, we've something like 97% of the county now who are on good quality broadband. That still leaves some difficult areas, and obviously we have businesses in those areas. But again, we're working with new technology that's available to try and fulfill that. Certainly through this pandemic situation we found ourselves in, I have not travelled to Carlisle once in the last 16 weeks. And that's a 60-mile round trip for me. Some of my colleagues, it's a 120-mile round trip for them because they live in the far south of the county. So we have been looking at what the benefits are that have come out of these kind of meetings we're having now. And again, you know, normally I'll be travelling to Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester to meet with Transport for the North, probably every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on which group I'm meeting with. So I think certainly this is a way forward. I think we will have to come back to face-to-face meetings at some time. You just need to be looking into people's eyes sometimes to see whether we're going to be able to get an agreement. But nevertheless, I think this is another way that we can find to work, which will cut down an immense amount on our travel times. But the road infrastructure in a rurality, as I spoke earlier, in a place like Cumbria, you know, 500,000 square miles, and possibly anywhere between a 4 to 6 hour journey from one end of the county to the other, even with motorways and some good quality A and dual carriage roads, is difficult. As we try to build our infrastructure, we're trying to open up more areas around Carlisle with potential new building of almost 10,000 plus homes. So working with the Housing Infrastructure Fund, a new dual carriageway going in there, linking Carlisle's fringes to the M6 motorway. That will assist with us with some heavy vehicles coming off the motorway and down into West Cumbria. With the development going on in Barrow area for the nuclear new build, military nuclear new build, there's obviously some road infrastructures in there, the 590, the 595. And again, we've got plans in with government at the moment. But, you know, there's no really development of brand new roads at the moment. We're just trying to maintain what we've got and the rurality, the rural roads. Cycling is becoming a big event, and that's a big issue now. And that's been apparent. We have many miles of cycling in Cumbria and something like 50 odd miles where no traffic are on those roads at all. So we are trying to work the best we can in Cumbria with the limited finances we have, and we're aware that, you know, people are wanting more from us, and we try to work across the northwest of England to see where we can get the best benefit, Peter.
Thanks, Keith. Turning to Emma now, on the same subject, and I know you mentioned you've got your State of the Nation report, and one of the questions we've had is from Jonathan Spruce, who's talking about, there was a recent ICE event which talked about flexible infrastructure whereby road space can be allocated to different types of users at different times. How do you think the profession is reacting to this challenge of climate change and construction?
I think we are in a position where a lot of companies are being driven by the public agenda. And so it is as it comes through local authorities, local transport authorities, where that is becoming more prevalent. I think the problem that we've got is that it's always been a little bit stop-start with public money, and you know, obviously there's more pressure on local authority budgets going forward, and this is an issue I think for the whole of the engineering industry, is that we like a guaranteed pipeline, because otherwise we lose our skilled people to other projects, other countries, or other industries. And so skills is absolutely critical. I think engineers are renowned for meeting the challenge, and you know, are creative in the solutions that they come up with for providing that kind of mix and match approach. And we, you know, there are lots and lots of examples of that already in existence, some in this country and many from abroad, about how we can share road space much more effectively. You know, within the centre of Manchester, we've got the Oxford Road corridor, which is moving towards that in a much more effective way. And Councillor Little has just been outlining how cyclists are, you know, kind of being provided for in Cumbria. I think we need to be a bit smarter about how we make places more attractive for people to walk through as well, and not just in the cities. So you know, there's work there. I think engineers will rise to the challenge, but ultimately it comes down to how do we fund these things, and we have to be a bit more creative around that, I think.
Thank you, Emma. Talking to Adam, you mentioned some of the things that you're looking at in terms of Highways England, and one of the questions that we've had is about designated HGV routes and through High Peak, but also someone's asked, you know, what are the opportunities for national road pricing? So could you pick that up as part of your response in terms of climate change?
Yes, thank you, Peter, and thank you for the questions. I think there's a few things on particularly HGV, and I'd absolutely agree with what was said earlier. Just we really need to recognise the importance of freight and how much freight relies on the whole road network, and we certainly know from our perspective how much freight relies on the motorways and A roads. I think there are some earlier things we want to focus on, which is around doing far more to get better information to our freight operators, or the freight operators who use the strategic road network. We know that we can do better then, and certainly we've got plans to do that, to give more up-to-date information about roadworks, about journey times and so on, because we know freight relies so much more now on just-in-time deliveries, quick deliveries and so on. In terms of managing the road space for particular users or not, and I think whether that then leads on into road pricing. I actually worked a little bit on road pricing policy earlier on in my career for the Department for Transport, and I know there were some big challenges in not really the technical side of making it happen, but I think having a very clear proposition to road users as to how it would work and for what purpose. And I know that you know, over a decade ago now, it never quite got off the ground there. Well, I know that, you know, government will always be considering options like that. And I think there was another question just about, fuel duty, and is there a need to look at the tax take from road users and really think about that. I think if there is a proposition to come forward on road pricing, it probably needs to be a very simple one and a very clear proposition, and I think a really clear purpose. Is it something to help the environmental agenda, so to effectively join up maybe what cities' plans are around using pricing as a way to manage environmental or to deliver environmental benefits, whether that then rolls out onto the national roads, or is it, as was discussed a few years ago, is it more around congestion directly? And I think that you need to start with a very clear proposition there. I do think there are things that we can do before we even get close to thinking about road pricing. I do think the sort of technologies that we're able to have on our network now to think about managing speed limits, think about how we use and make lanes available to vehicles can be used. And I do expect to see that technologies, more in-car technologies around connected vehicles will sort of be a big help there. So I think personally, rather than perhaps seeing more, say, dedicated lanes or so on for HGVs, a lot we can do to help give the information to freight operators and think about how we manage the network as a whole and use emerging technologies as a whole. And certainly, and apologies for ducking the question a little bit on road pricing, I know very much that is a decision for government, but I do think there's a lot that can be done to tackle the challenges that you set out before we get to that point.
Thank you very much, Adam, and sorry for the difficult road pricing question. So just moving on now to Lucy, and then I'll come to Paul. Lucy, just one of the questions that we've got in terms of freight is about whether we move to multimodal terminals across the north to try and reduce the impact. And then Paul, I'd like you to come in on some alternative technologies for freight, and I know the Tees Valley area is looking at hydrogen. So Lucy, if you could come in first about how freight can, particularly in terms of this multimodal terminals across the north.
I think it's something the freight industry does. When you think about if you've got a distribution centre, if you've got any companies, they want to have the best accessibility and the best way of moving their goods and materials around. So if that's road, they invest in roads, but the multimodal element is always really going to be very important. There are companies looking at expanding into rail operations because they recognise that the volume of food that they're moving, they want access to the railway. There's different ways to do that. So you can set up a railhead, or you can have if you're sited next to a railway, you can then there are companies looking at how they can then access that part of the railway to maybe have nighttime operations. So I think increasing the modality around how we move things around the north is going to be really key for all the different companies that we've got in the north. I know when we've also got distribution warehousing sort of hotspots, so around the Liverpool area, and it's also because it's accessibility. That means it's a really good place for companies to go, because they can access the railway and they can access the road. So I think it should that kind of multimodal development should be encouraged and made sure that the fueling and also the accessibility to the network is maintained.
Thank you, Lucy. Paul, thank you for joining us. The question really, we're talking about climate change and the impact on roads, and I'm just wondering whether you could talk about some of the really interesting work Tees Valley are doing in terms of the use of hydrogen.
Yeah, just can I maybe a point on infrastructure first? And I think, as Emma already spoken, because I'm sorry for being late, but it occurs to me that building roads, because I think we do need them. We need to think about it in a different way. So, for instance, we can now make cement from magnesium oxide, through brine, which actually absorbs CO2 and gets stronger. One of the easiest materials to make from recycled steel is rebar. So I think there's a question there about materials and use of materials and sustainability and recycling materials in building infrastructure, which is all part of the same equation that maybe we haven't really given as much focus to, which is just a sort of an aside. But just coming on to hydrogen, first of all, a lot of work's going on battery technology. And in fact, if you go do what I do, spend hours on Google, you'll see that now there are CO2 hydrogen-based batteries coming on. So there are all kinds of different technologies which are far lighter and powerful that will drive dust carts, bus fleets, any vehicles really, including trains. So again, I think there's an important, it's not about, it's about this or this. I think it's a combination of all of these things. So we've been working and are working very hard to produce, we're not the first, a hydrogen network. We've already got a hydrogen network, through the chemical industry, which is where I come from, in the Tees Valley, and a storage system as well. But then linking that into rail transport so that we can basically green everything from sort of east of Darlington in the fullness of time. And if I extend that point, I mean, we could imagine, where does the hydrogen come from? It's about linking things again. So I'm aware of some of the very large developments in offshore wind. I'm looking at another 400 megawatt development just off Dogger Bank. But if you look at the times that these things are offline or power's not being used, you could probably off one field develop something like 100 kilotons of hydrogen. When everybody's in bed sleeping, nobody's using the power and the wind's still blowing. So Shell in Moerdijk are already building electrolyzers at 10 megawatts. So what you've got is the ability to harness wind power or solar power and convert that to hydrogen and store it for use in vehicles economically. And we're already building in the Tees Valley I think we have sanction for 2 hydrogen filling stations. So we're not the first, but certainly we're amongst the first. So, and the point about that is that that means if we can convert to hydrogen, certainly on the with heavy goods vehicles and rail, that does an enormous amount all by itself to ease the carbon problem. And the question somebody might ask is, well, how do you get hydrogen from the Tees Valley to Manchester? Well, the answer is actually back to electrolyzers. It works both ways. So the system is already there for me. It's called a national grid. You just move the electrons to wherever you need to and convert them to hydrogen at that point. The economics are already pretty good. So in the fullness, so as you go forwards, you see that you can create hydrogen nodes where we have power stations or big terminals that actually gives us the flexibility to do what I've just described. So let me just stop there and just see whether that's met anybody's needs.
Thank you, Paul. That was fascinating, I think, of the art of the possible. And I'd just like to stay with you and Adam on this question. Is obviously the economic recovery is going to be crucial as we come out of the pandemic. So in terms of the Northeast, what are the LEP's plans? And in terms of Highways England, what are the LEP's plans for economic recovery? And what's the role of roads in those economic recovery plans? So I'll start with Adam, because Paul's just spoken, and I'll shift to Paul.
Sorry, Peter, I've just seen a question. What I've been talking about there is green hydrogen, not brown hydrogen, in answer to Lucy's question.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Adam, economic recovery.
In terms of possible economic stimulus in the north, which I think was your sort of question there. Certainly, I'd say because a lot of thinking has gone into the road investment strategy the government published back in March. So I think there are some really good projects in there that are being taken forward and are absolutely committed to. I think it's probably, I'm sure it'll be no surprise to folks on this webinar here, although it's really helpful to set out our thinking in those 5-year periods, and it gives certainly that certainty that we sort of heard from earlier, which is important to the supply chain and engineering and so on, over 5 years. You know, we do continue obviously our thinking in that sort of area, and when you introduced me, you said, you know, we're already starting to think about the next road investment period and so on. So in that, there is always a number of options and ideas that can be taken forward, and the discussions that we've had with government in setting the RIS and during the coronavirus crisis is that there are options that can be turned to if government wants to invest further in particular regions across the country and so on. Obviously, it's not for me to say which particular projects that might be considered and taken forward. That's entirely a decision for government there. But I think there are projects that that could be taken forward, be they what we might think of as the sort of new road schemes or enhancement schemes. But also, I think it's really important to recognise that there's important work and investment that's required in renewing and maintaining our existing assets and making sure that they can be in good condition, so that we avoid getting to the point where, for example, emergency works might be required that we know can have a really significant impact locally if roadworks have to suddenly come on, and emergency works can take quite a long time to work through. So we're looking not just at those new enhancement schemes, although that's certainly part of the picture, but also renewals type activity. And I would say as well, with things like smart motorways, I know there's been a lot of discussion about those recently, encouraged to see that they are at least as safe as other conventional motorways. But I think they often offer some good opportunities in taking forward projects quite quickly, not least because they can be taken forward within the land that Highways England already owns effectively and has our roads on. So actually, they are sorts of schemes that can be taken forward quite quickly. So there are a range of options, and we've absolutely been talking to government about those. And depending on how government wants to take that forward, I think we can absolutely be part of any particular recovery package, you know, in the north and across the country.
Thank you, Adam. Paul, what's the Tees Valley LEP's plans for economic recovery, and what part will roads play in that?
Well, the answer is, well, so connectivity is key, and we have aspirations to become a free port as part of the sort of post-Brexit world, and we already have PD ports have a container port there, which can develop out. So we see that road connectivity has been vital. Well, when I say connectivity, I think we've already made the point. I'm sure people have already made the point that connecting sea to rail to roads in every which way it's about the integration of this. It's not one nor the other. But we see the development of the A66, going north as critical to to the road network. We see the new A19 flyover, which is a bottleneck, as critical to economic activity and recovery. But equally, if you look at the industrial strategy, which talks about building, green power stations and green fertilizer plants and so on, all of that's got to be moved from the products moved from somewhere to somewhere. So it does require a very good 21st century road network. And in fact, yesterday I was talking to a minister about exactly these plans. So the development of the road network complementing the local industrial strategy build out, particularly in the east side of the region.
Thank you, Paul. That was really, really good. I just want to ask. We've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to come on to the very important subject of active travel. And one of the questions that we've had in is is modal shift just about money? So I'd like to come to Emma first, and then Keith, and then Lucy. So what is the role of active travel, and are we spending enough on it? And how could we fund active travel going forward? So Emma first.
I'm not really in a position to talk about funding, I don't think. I think we do have to be a bit more creative generally in terms of there are lots of interested parties and the way that transport has been funded has been very much segregated in the past, I think. And it's about trying to bring together organisations and their funding and their aspirations in order to solve problems. I think in terms of active travel, we probably haven't given it enough priority in the past, and not for want of trying, I don't think, but again, I think it does come down to the way funding is allocated, not necessarily if there's enough funding, but how it's allocated and justified. But I think in terms of the opportunities for active travel, they're massive. And we've seen, as I mentioned before, the impact of fewer vehicles on the roads on people's willingness to walk and cycle because of the safety aspect, largely, I think, and coupled with the difficulties around public transport use at the current time. So I think, yes, let's look at how we can be more creative about providing more opportunities for people to have choice about how they make their journeys.
Thank you, Emma. Keith, obviously we don't have Transforming Cities funds, but I would imagine active travel for both commuters but also visitors is a key part of your plan. So in a rural and varied community that you have, how are you building active travel into the use of roads in Cumbria?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And again, a very important point. We've been working very closely on active travel with particularly our colleagues within the National Park. And over the last sort of 10 years, 8 to 10 years, we've been involved in Seymour and Go Lakes, where we now have boats that will carry cycles as well as the County Council's ferry. And we have buses that will take cycles. So people coming into the county by cycle can get around much better. And we all have encouraged that. As I said earlier, we have many, many miles of cycling around Cumbria, and some of about 50 odd miles of that is on dedicated tracks where there's no vehicle access at all. Certainly over the COVID-19 period, we have seen many more people cycling, many more people walking, and many groups of cyclists now getting out together and supporting each other. I've been a cyclist all my life and cycled to work for many years. I only did 5 miles, then 5 mile back, but really beneficial at the end of a long day in work. So we are working actively within our towns and city projects. Carlisle City, for example, they're producing their new travel plans for Carlisle, and we will be working with them to include cycling and walking and linkages certainly to the railway station, as that's part of a bigger scheme in Carlisle. So absolutely. However, not everybody can cycle to work and not everybody can walk to work, and we have to be considerate of that as well. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Keith. That was a really good answer. Lucy, obviously there must be limitations in terms of active travel for freight and logistics, but surely in terms of the last mile, is there a role to play, particularly as we've all started getting click and collect and ordering online? Is there a role there in terms of alleviating the problem?
There are different technologies that I've seen around, especially around European cities, where companies use converted cycles. So you get big kind of almost wheelbarrow-like bicycles that can move around the city one thing you've got to do when you're using that kind of active travel mode of delivery is making sure that the infrastructure is accessible to these vehicles, and making sure that people don't just get stuck in congested networks. So it's about making the infrastructure that you've got flexible. So so vehicles that are designed for making more localized deliveries can get to their destination on time and safely, as well as having sort of hubs. So where maybe the cycles start from, where they start their journeys, making sure that deliveries to those points are sustainable and accessible and safe for all users as well. So there's a number of things to think about in terms of setting that policy. But if local authority partners are working on that they'll be considering those as part of being the highway authority.
Okay, thanks. And Adam, just to come back to you to finish off, because I know Highways England are looking at active travel. Do you want to say what you're doing in terms of this field? And
Thank you. I think kind of in support a lot of what others have said. I think it's important, something that we sort of work through together. I think as with a lot of things, it's about having a number of different tools together to support. What our customers and our road users want to do and how to travel. So I think a lot of this is around providing good information to people to help inform some of those choices and so on. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much. I'd like to draw this to a close now. I'd just like to thank all our speakers. Normally we'll have a virtual clap. So Councillor Keith Little, Adam Simmons from Highways England, Emma Antrobus from the ICE, Lucy Hudson from TFN, Paul Booth from Tees Valley Local Enterprise. Can I just remind everybody that our next event is on the morning of the 6th of July with Lord Jim O'Neill about Northern Growth, and more details will be available shortly. More panelists will be confirmed. So I do hope you enjoy today. Can I just thank everyone for their contributions, and more importantly, can I thank everyone who's asked very sensible questions, and I found this a really interesting conversation, and I hope others have as well. So thank you all, and stay safe. So thank you very much.